I was driving through rural New Jersey when I saw him, a hitchhiker, standing by the side of the road, surprisingly well dressed, black suit, slicked back hair, and a narrow briefcase. Now, I know I shouldn't pick up hitchhikers, but I'm 6'4", 230 pounds, with all kinds of hunting equipment in the back of my truck. It's not like this prissy businessman is gonna beat me to death and leave me on the side of the road. Besides, I could use the gas money. "Hey man," I said, pulling over to the side of the road. "I'll give you a lift if you pay me for gas." "Of course," he said in a polite accent. He reached for his wallet and pulled out three $20 bills. "This enough?" I grinned. "That's way more than enough." I greedily snatched the money from him and clicked the locks. "Jump in, bud." He climbed in. His blue eyes shifted from the crumbled Wendy's wrapper on the dashboard to the mysterious sticky goo on the middle console. "Sorry the car's not clean. I'm actually going hunting," I said, turning back onto the highway. "Hunting? Interesting," he said, in a strangely enthusiastic tone. "Have you always liked to hunt?" "No, it's the funniest thing. Never thought I'd ever hunt. I love animals, got 3 dogs at home, but there are so many deer around these parts. When the winter comes, a lot of them starve to death, not to mention all the car accidents they cause." I trailed off, and we fell into an uncomfortable silence. "Just hunting for the day then?" "No, my buddy Matt and I will be out there for the whole weekend." He let out a laugh. "The whole weekend? Your wife's a saint for letting you go." "My wife? How did he?" But then my eyes fell on the steering wheel and the silver ring on my finger. "Ah, yeah, Mary's a doll. She's actually pregnant, 5 months with a little girl." He gave me a crooked smile. "A girl? Huh. Yeah." I could feel him staring at me long after we had fallen into silence. It made me feel uncomfortable, so I clicked on the radio. "How did you and Matt meet?" he asked, fiddling with the dial. All that came through was static. That's a weird question, I thought. He and Mary were close friends, so when we got married, I got to know him pretty well." "Mm-hmm," the man said. He stroked his chin thoughtfully, and I was suddenly reminded of a psychiatrist. "Are you a psychiatrist?" I blurted out. He laughed. "Definitely not. I work in finance." "What type of finance?" It was my turn to ask the questions now. "Futures," he replied, non-committally. I glanced over at him. A small smile was on his lips. I noticed his fingers had gravitated from his lap to the briefcase at his feet. My heart began to pound. Click. He undid the clasp. The case creaked open. "What's in your briefcase?" I asked. "Work." "What kind of?" His long fingers disappeared into the darkness of the case. He was pulling something out. My blood began to seize up. The steering wheel felt like ice under my fingers. "I have a lot of hunting equipment back there," I said, "so you better not be." I stopped. He was only pulling out a sheet of paper. For a few minutes, he was quiet, reading the paper, intently and silently, as if his life depended on it. His fingers slid over it as they traced the text. Then he slipped it back into the case and snapped it shut. What was he reading? I thought. But before I could get my question out, he turned towards me. I could barely see his face in my peripheral vision, but I knew he was staring at me. for minutes on end. Then, he broke the silence. "Don't go hunting," he said, his ice blue eyes boring into me. "What?" "Turn the car around, go home to Mary." "What?" "She needs you." He paused. "Madeline needs you." I paled. I never told him we were going to name our baby Madeline. "How did you?" "He's going to make it look like an accident," he said, his voice gravelly and haunting. "Just a simple accident. The most punishment he'll endure is 35 minutes in the police station, writing out his statement." "But let me off at that diner up ahead. I like their Cobb salad very much." "Matt's going to kill me? What are you talking about?" He turned to me, eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "About what you just said." "All I said was I'd like for you to drop me off at the diner, please." He pointed to the exit, curving off the highway. "You're going to miss it if you don't slow down." With a shaking hand, I clicked off my blinker, pulling off the exit into the parking lot. My heart pounded in time with the clicking of the cooling engine. "Thank you for the ride," he said, pulling his briefcase out with him. "Have a good drive, will you?" I couldn't squeak out a reply before the door slammed shut. I didn't believe him, but my nerves were too shot to continue my trip either. I texted Matt that I was sick, turned around, and went home to Mary. Mary was thrilled. Matt was disappointed. A little too disappointed, if you ask me. A month later, after ignoring most of Matt's calls and texts, which became increasingly frequent and desperate, I heard a faint thumping noise at the door. When I flicked on the porch light, there was Matt, hunched over our doorknob, holding a lockpick. We called the police. Since then, life has been great. Just a few months later, our wonderful little Madeline was born, and as soon as we got back from the hospital, on our doorstep was a little teddy bear, a pink bow sewed on its head. There wasn't a return address or a card of any kind, but I think I know who it was from. I quit my job at Stagview Prison today. I've been a correctional officer for about a year now, and I found the job exciting and rewarding. I'd been discharged from the military after 2 years for medical reasons, and as the bills piled up and my funds shrank into the double digits, I knew I had to find work. The state was paying COs good money, with excellent benefits, and they generally hired military guys over civilians. I put in my app and started my new and exciting life as a correctional officer within a month. After a year of yelling at grown men, searching cells, and a mountain of other bullcrap, I got myself into a little bit of trouble. I'd gotten a bit of a reputation for laying hands on unruly inmates, so when the major called me into his office, I kind of expected it. I had been assured by my fellow officers that I'd most likely get a slap on the wrist, maybe a few days of administrative leave, and be back to work within a week. What I hadn't expected was 3 months on post, as I assessed my attitude and the way I interact with others. For those who don't know, post is the most boring assignment in all of corrections. You spend your night in a vehicle, driving around the perimeter, trying not to fall asleep and crash your car into a ditch. It's tedious and unfulfilling work given to older officers, incompetent officers, or officers in need of a good slap on the nose. I was understandably upset about this development, but as there was nothing I could do about it, I swallowed my pride and prepared for my 3-month stay in purgatory. Had I known what would happen to me, I'd have turned in my badge on the spot. I was met at the gate by Sergeant Mathis on what was to be my first night on post. I'd seen Mathis a few times since I started, but I didn't think I'd ever spoken with him. Mathis is old even by DOC standards, and he's been riding post for the last 10 years of his career. To hear some of the older officers tell it, he used to be some badass on the compound, but he was sent to post after getting injured and just never came off it. He rides post every night, continually roving up and down his 2-mile track, never missing a night. He looked about as thrilled to see me as I was to be here. Post may not seem as difficult as working on the compound, but you're the prison's first line of defense in many ways. They've put you on Route 2 tonight, the back line, so just be sure you're ready for 12 hours before you head out. He let his hand slide along the bed of the battered old Ford Ranger, like a rider stroking an old but willing steed. So what do I do on post exactly? I know I patrol every 15 to 30 minutes, but other than patrol constantly, he said, rounding on me in sudden anger. He got very close to my face before I realized it, and his eyes were huge and staring. I took a step back from him, and the side mirror slapped into my back, making me jump. His face was wooden, ghoulish in its intensity, and he seemed on the verge of punching me. He seemed to realize what he was doing and took a step back. You want to patrol constantly. If you're always moving, then nothing can sneak up on you. Also, make sure you leave your cell phone in the car. I know how some of you younger officers think no one will notice if you bring your phones out to post. But trust me when I say that, you don't want any lights out there. No dome lights, no headlights. Just use the light poles to navigate, and you'll be okay. I raised an eyebrow at him. Okay from what? He didn't say anything, just ran a hand along the truck near the big dent in the back fender. Okay from what? I asked again, and he seemed to notice me this time as he came back to reality. I had a conversation with a young officer like you once. 3 years ago. He came out to post for a few weeks and didn't think he had to listen to my warnings either. They found his truck out by the Post 2 shed, doors wide open. Come morning after, they couldn't raise him on the radio. He wasn't in it. There was no sign of him at all, and he didn't show up to work the next day. He didn't show up to work any day after that either, and was never seen again. I scoffed. Dude probably just got bored and left. Mathis looked at me solidly. Don't get complacent out there, boy. This isn't the sort of place that forgives complacency. There are things out there that are better kept out of prison. What those things were, he refused to elaborate on. He just stumbled towards the front and away from me and the idling truck. The first hour and a half were very dull. I watched from the front seat of the Ranger as they fed evening meal, watching the inmates scamper back to their dorms as daylight began to wane and night began to creep up. After sundown, the radio announced restricted movement and concluded any unsupervised strolls across the compound. It was 8 o'clock, only 2 hours left into my shift, and I pulled up next to the Post 2 shed and killed the engine. I put my feet up on the dash and pulled out my phone, not caring what some old fart had to say, as I surfed Reddit and checked my Facebook. It was a boring post, but I had to admit that it had its perks. As I sat, the sun waning and eventually dying around me, I started to catch something out of the corner of my eye. The compound sat perched on a little incline, surrounded by a thick wood. The woods were a good 50 feet away from the fences, but close enough to make them look menacingly close in the dark. Something kept bounding in and out of them, just off to the left of my line of sight. Once or twice, I thought I caught a glimpse of a dog or something in the side mirror, but I shrugged it off and got back to my phone. By the time it was good and dark, it was time for me to take a turn around my part of the perimeter. As I cranked the old truck, it sputtered and died on me. I cursed, twisted the key, and gave it some gas this time to make it sputter to life. They always gave corrections, the worst vehicles. I was driving around the little dirt path, trying to keep it on the road, when something big ran in front of my truck. I slammed on the brakes, but it was already gone. It had been on the fence side of the road and running for the woods. I'd only gotten a quick look at it as it lopped past. It looked like a giant dog, and as I looked towards the woods, I couldn't see anything but the nearly invisible tree line. I was feeling startled as I pulled back towards the sheds. What the hell was that thing? I had heard that some of the dogs might have formed little dog packs, but this thing had been bigger than the usual mutts I saw in the area. I parked and turned off the truck again, pulling out my phone to clear my head. 10 minutes of social media later, and I had calmed down a little. I hadn't forgotten about the big dog thing, but I decided that I had blown it out of proportion. It was just a dog, nothing to worry about. When I looked back at the clock, I realized it was already 10 o'clock. I cranked the truck again and was just about to pull onto the road again when something hit the side of my vehicle. I had reached for my monster in the cup holder just before the hit, and I cursed as the drink spilled all over my shirt. I shook the sticky liquid off as I looked behind me, thinking I had clipped the shed somehow. What I saw was a new dent in the back of my truck, and no sign of whatever I had hit. If the dent hadn't been there, I would have thought I had just imagined the whole thing. I got out and looked around, but there was nothing to see, just a dent in the fender and the oppressive darkness around the shed. After doing my circuit again, I pulled back up to the shed in a pretty foul mood. I felt sticky and miserable. I was covered in the energy drink, my ass was starting to fall asleep, and I needed to pee like a racehorse. I looked around for a bathroom, but there was no bathroom to be seen. I wondered where the other post drivers went to the bathroom, probably carried a bottle or something. I looked around fretfully and finally decided to just go behind the shed. It was hidden pretty well, and I doubted that anyone would see me. I stepped out of the car, leaving the door open and the engine running, and walked behind the shed to do my business. I had barely started when I heard something slam into the side of the truck. A stream of hot piss joined the energy drink on my shirt as I jumped about a mile. I turned to see what had hit the car, just as a second loud crunch shattered the passenger window. I got myself zipped up and rounded the shed, expected a large dog or a bird, but I found much worse. Between me and the door, its massive shoulder resting against the dent, was something that was part mountain lion and part nightmare hound. Its skin was midnight black, chitinous plates that creaked when it moved, with a long snout full of sharp teeth that dribbled over its jaws. Its eyes were non-existent, and its feet were home to long sharp claws that had sliced a line in the side of my Ranger. It turned that eyeless head on me and opened its mouth to loose a loud, angry sound that immediately sent me running. My boots clapped against the dirt road as I ran for my life. As I ran, my mind raced, trying to form a plan that didn't involve trying to outsprint this thing for half a mile. I could double back to the car. I wasn't that far away, and there was a radio and a shotgun in there that I could use to call for help and defend myself. No matter how big this thing was, a load of buckshot to the face was likely to leave it in a bad way. Yeah, it probably hadn't even left the shed yet. I was sure I could turn now and make it back before it. I heard a snarl right behind me and didn't have to look to know that it was less than a foot away. I sprinted, running flat out, and if I'd fallen, I'd have died. I hadn't run far when my back exploded in agony. I wanted to stop, wanted to see how bad it had clawed me, but I knew I had to run. I ran, the spotlights offering me islands to lights in the glowing darkness. And as I ran, I heard its heavy footsteps behind me veer out into the light. It didn't seem to like being in the light, and I used this to my advantage, putting on a burst of speed every time I left one of those islands of safety. I could see the curve that would take me around the fence and back into the prison's front area. There would be people there, guards in the control room, doors to hide behind, and people that would shoot this thing and let me live another day. That's when I tripped. I fell hard onto the dirt, rolling as I fell, and I covered my head with my arms as I came to a stop. I just knew that it would be on me now, tearing me apart, and I quivered as the seconds ticked with no ripping pain. Something fell across me then, some bright flash that blinded me, even behind my closed eyelids. I sat as still as I could in the sand, as some new, roaring monster stepped inches away from my head. The monster quieted all at once, and I heard someone ask what the hell I thought I was doing. I opened my eyes and found the Post 1 vehicle sitting before me, its lights bathing me where I sat. I didn't answer her. I just got up and ran. I ran to my truck, pushed the keys in the ignition, and thundered out of the parking lot like a bat out of hell. My phone rang about 10 minutes later, but I didn't answer. It's been ringing all night, but I haven't answered it. I know it's the prison, but I don't care. I'm never going back there again. I'm sitting here in the bathtub, my back wound making the water red as I soaked up all the heat. The cuts on my back are deep, but I don't know where to get them cleaned and tended to. I don't know if I ever want to leave the house again. What I saw tonight, I stumbled across something I can't explain. I'm not going back to work, but if you take my place, be sure to listen to the old man when he tells you to continually rove. If you have to go to post, make sure you follow the rules. Don't stop. Don't bring anything out there that might draw its attention. And don't get out of the car for any reason. Otherwise, they might find your car out on post one morning after whatever lives in the woods finds you. Yesterday, I looked up our house on Google Street View. I wish I didn't. The picture showed our little blue A-frame perfectly, the flower boxes leaning out of the kitchen window, filled with morning glories, the cedar rocking chair, the splotch of brown paint on the steps from when I painted the desk. But there were two people standing on the porch, two people I didn't recognize. Even though their faces were blurred out, I knew they couldn't be us. We're Indian, and they were clearly white. Who are those people? My brother Arjun asked. I have no idea. I leaned into the computer screen, squinting at the pixels. Maybe some of my friends from school? But I knew that couldn't be true. They looked like adults, the man and woman both wearing gray tailored suits. I don't know any 15-year-old that dresses like they work on Wall Street. Maybe it's an old picture, I said. Maybe they're the previous owners. But that didn't seem right either. First of all, the text in the corner read, Street View, July 2017. Second, they didn't seem to just be hanging out and relaxing at their home. The woman was standing at the corner of the porch, weight on one hip, arms crossed over her chest. The man stood unnaturally straight, as if he were posing for the photo, hands deep in his pockets. Maybe it's photoshopped. I turned to him. Really, Arjun? He shrugged. I don't know. Maybe they photoshopped it purposely, to scare us, to make us move. You really think Google would let someone mess with their photos? He shrugged. All those big companies and organizations and celebrities, they're super corrupt. Like Hillary Clinton, she's been doing satanic rituals for years, and she's the ringleader of... I cut him off. I see. Another conspiracy theory. Sometimes I think the hospital must have messed with his brain all those years ago. Don't worry, we'll heal you up, little baby. Let us just upload some crazy theories into your head first. It's not a theory, it's true. You sound like an idiot. Mom says you shouldn't call me that, Dea. Whatever, it's not photoshopped. Okay, then what do you think it is? I stared at the photo. Those two people. They looked familiar, almost. Something about them. Their gray suits, their matching silver shoes. Something rung a bell. I don't know, I said finally. Arjun eventually returned to his room, probably to tweet about some more conspiracy theories to his 51 followers. How they let a 13-year-old own a Twitter account is beyond me. I went back to my homework. At least, I tried to. Every few minutes, my eyes tore away from the algebra textbook and back to the photo. Where had I seen them before? Friday went by at a snail's pace, between getting a C+ on a quiz and nearly falling asleep in history. I forgot all about the weird Street View image. After school, I grabbed a yogurt and headed straight for my room. But I froze when my eyes fell on a picture, hanging next to the stairs. It was a photo of Arjun and me. My mom had taken it when we visited Philadelphia a few years ago. Arjun was holding some sort of toy helicopter. I was wearing weird floral jeans and sparkly hair clips. But there, behind us, were two people. Two people wearing gray suits and silver shoes. I grabbed the framed picture off the wall, brought it up to my face. A blonde woman, arms crossed over her chest. A dark-haired man, hands in his pockets. Their faces weren't blurred out in this one, but they were wearing dark sunglasses. Mom, I called, heading back into the kitchen. Do you remember taking this picture? In Philadelphia? Oh yeah, sure, she replied, through chops of broccoli. Why? Who are those people behind us? Mom took the photo and brought it close to her face. Her eyes were calm, searching. And then, suddenly, they widened. Just random people, she said, brusquely. But I saw them. Shouldn't you be doing your homework? She snapped. It's Friday, Mom. But your grades aren't good. She didn't give the photo back to me. Instead, she set it down on the counter. You should be studying, not inspecting old family photos. I turned around and ran up the stairs. That stung. A lot. Usually Mom treats me like I'm made of glass, always praising me, hugging me, telling me how wonderful I am. Yelling at Arjun, sure. But me? It was out of character to say the least. I plopped down in front of the computer, typed in maps.google.com. I should be planning my 16th birthday party. It's only 2 weeks away. Or on Facebook, checking if Bria Pierce dumped Chad yet. But I wasn't. I was here, on Google Maps, staring at them. The gray suits, the silver shoes, the faces that were blurred into blobs of undeniable flesh. Then, on a whim, I typed in a different address. Roxanne Court, our old address, the house we lived in before moving here. The image loaded. There, in the front yard, stood 2 figures, wearing gray suits. What? I zoomed in, staring at the screen. Wisps of blonde hair fell on the shoulders of the woman. The man held his hands in his pockets. They both stood there in the front lawn, in plain sight, as if nothing was amiss. The text read, Street View, May 2012. When we'd lived there, my hands trembled against the keyboard, my heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to type a third address. 6th Street, the tiny starter house we'd lived in several years ago. The image loaded. A cute, white ranch with 2 windows in front, a carpet of fluorescent green grass, and a cracked cobblestone walkway appeared. The porch was empty. I breathed a sigh of relief. They weren't there. No one standing on the lawn, in the driveway, or anywhere around the house. If those people were following us, they'd be here too. I took slow, deep breaths, calming my racing heart. I was about to click away when something caught my eye. Something in the window. I zoomed in. The window was dark, cut by white lines separating the glass into panes. But in the lower right pane, there was something there, pale, pressed up against the glass. I zoomed in again. It was a face. Fear coursed through my veins. I slammed the laptop shut, leapt out of my chair, and then I did what any terrified teenager would do. I ran downstairs to Mom. Mom, I called, fear trembling my voice. Mom? I stopped. The broccoli lay strewn over the kitchen island, half chopped. The faucet dripped. The napkins lay on the floor. Mom? We're in here. My mom's voice, weak, trembling. We're? Oh, no. The 2 gray suits. Were they here, holding my mom hostage? I ran into the family room, my heart pounding. But it wasn't them. It was Dad. Dad? Aren't you supposed to be at work? I said. I glanced from the grim expression on his face to the tears straining Mom's cheeks. What happened? Oh my God. Did Grandma? Grandma's fine, Dad said. I stared at them. We need to talk to you, Mom said, her voice broken with sobs. About something we did a long time ago. I sat down on the ottoman, a heavy weight settling in on my chest. Do you remember when Arjun was very sick in the hospital? When you were about 6? Dad asked, folding his hands in his lap. That's random. But I nodded. The hospital. The red-haired nurse who gave me a lollipop. The vending machine that had the vanilla wafers. It was all fuzzy. distorted and blurred through the lens of time. At the time, I was too young to understand exactly what was going on with Arjun, but I was old enough to know my brother was very sick and that my parents were miserable. You remember how he suddenly recovered, right? Dad said, his tone falling from explanatory to miserable. The doctors couldn't explain it, said it was a miracle. Do you remember what we told you? 2 angels came down straight from heaven, touched his chest, and healed his lungs. I repeated mechanically. They must have told me that story hundreds of times. There was some truth in it. We were approached in the hospital by 2 people, claiming they could heal Arjun. His eyes averted my eyes. For a price. We told him we were fine with whatever price they wanted. If we didn't have the money, we'd take out loans. We'd pay them back for the rest of our lives if we had to. 2 people, wearing gray suits? He nodded. After they healed him, they told us the price. They didn't want money. Dad's voice shuddered, and he looked me in the eye. They wanted you. My heart stopped. Me? They told us they'd come back for you, Mom finally said, her eyes wet with tears. That they'd take you on your 16th birthday. But my birthday is in 2 weeks. She nodded. What do you mean, take me? What are they going to do with me? Mom and Dad looked at each other, uncomfortably. We have no idea, Dad said, finally breaking the silence. We never would have done it if we knew, Mom said, her voice muffled in a tissue. I promise that. We love you, Dia, and never wanted to. We thought we could escape them. Dad broke in, cutting her off. We just move into the middle of nowhere, change our names maybe. How could they find us after that? But they always did. They found us at every house we ever lived in. Street View confirmed that. Wordless, Mom got up and pulled an old photo album off the bookshelf. Wordlessly, she dropped it in my lap. They followed us, wherever we go. I flipped it open, Arjun and I eating ice cream at Cold Stone. At the next table, with their backs to us, 2 people sharing a milkshake. 2 people in gray suits. Arjun and I at the lake, hitting each other with pool noodles. In the distance, near the woods, 2 gray figures, watching. Arjun and I at the carnival, in the background, lit by the red and white lights of the Dragon roller coaster. They stood, wearing sunglasses, despite the darkness. They were always following, watching, waiting. There was nowhere I could hide. So that's it? They're just going to take me in 2 weeks? My parents looked at each other, tears in their eyes, and then they nodded. We hugged and cried for a long time. When I went up to my room, turned on the computer, and opened a new tab. Not Google Maps. Google. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Guns, bombs, mace, tasers, weapons of any and every kind. How to buy, where to purchase, expedited shipping. Yes, I've only got 2 weeks after all. They may be coming for me, but I will not go gently into that good night. I've been in construction my whole working life. I started straight out of school, 10 years ago, and I've spent much of that time on the move. Not a lot of people know this, but when the job ends, craft workers are mostly laid off. Pipe fitters, carpenters, crane operators, all gone. That means we need to pick up our tools and head to a different job site, hoping to get hired back on. Since the money is good, that's what I do. It's the life I've always known. Every few years, I just travel from one side of the country to the other, hoping to find work. After my last job ended, which was about a week ago, I received word from my old boss that this oil company was hiring. He said that since I was a good worker, I was just hired. Just show up and get to work. I told him to give me a few days and I'd be there as soon as I could. As for the location, it was some small town out in Illinois called Brookfield. I'd never heard of the place before, but that was nothing new. Most plants are built in the middle of nowhere. This is in case they explode. The loss of life would be minimal compared to the same disaster in a city. The next morning, I packed up my stuff and started driving. On the road, I called and spoke to some guy named Trevor over the phone. I'd found him on Craigslist. He was renting a room and the price was just about what I wanted to pay. "Hey, I'd love to have you." Through the phone, his voice sounded jovial. "I'll get some clean sheets on that bed and add an extra set of blankets. It gets chilly this time of year." "Oh, sir, thank you so much. I'll see you when I get there," I said. After driving for about 10 hours, I finally arrived at Brookfield, and it was nothing like how I expected. I've been to some pretty run-down towns before, but this one right here, their downtown could have easily been made into a setting for The Walking Dead. Most of the buildings I drove past looked either abandoned or half demolished. Some had girders sticking out of the sides like exposed ribs. Electric poles lay broken in the streets. One place that might have been a gift shop looked like it had just been burned down the night before. Parts of the blackened wood were still smoldering. The only buildings I saw that were still intact were a police station and a Waffle House. Also, directly in the center of town, there was a random graveyard. Not the sort with a freshly mowed lawn and neat tombstones set at regular intervals. This one had crosses, the kind made from 2 sticks roped together, buried in the muddy soil. Mounds of dirt sat next to freshly dug graves. Trees, their limbs twisted and gnarled, were scattered through the area, casting misshapen shadows. One of them even had a noose hanging from one of its branches. It swayed gently back and forth. I couldn't help but wonder if some kids had put it up there as some sort of sick joke, or if it was meant as a threat. A threat for whom? I had no idea. Swallowing around the tightness in my throat, I continued on, followed the GPS on my phone, and arrived at the place listed. Trevor was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a handwritten note taped on the door. It read, "Sam, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Something came up out of town that I had to take care of. Just hold on to the rent for a few days. I'll collect it as soon as I get back. Keys in the potted plant. Head on in and make yourself at home. Trevor." There was an arrow at the bottom, drawn in Sharpie, pointing down and to the left. I wouldn't exactly have called the object beneath it a potted plant. I would have said that it was a pot of dusty soil, with cobwebs and a small bare branch sticking out of the center. I jerked a shoulder, dug the key out of the dirt, and did as the paper said. The next morning, as I was making myself a pot of coffee in the kitchen, I found myself studying the pictures on the walls and the elderly gentleman who featured in a number of them. I assumed this was Trevor. In one picture, he was fishing. In another, he was at a family function, swinging at a piñata. He had a kind face, smiling in every photograph. I thought that once I met the guy, we'd probably get along nicely. After pouring my cup of joe, I headed outside, ready to leave for work, when I saw something on my windshield. There was an envelope placed under my wiper. Confused, I collected the envelope, pulled the paper out, and read it. It said I had been fined $100. Literally, you have been fined $100. No explanation. What's more, it was written on a normal sheet of wide-ruled loose-leaf paper in red crayon. Listed on the bottom of the paper was an address where I was supposed to mail the cash, check, or money order. What the hell is this? I thought to myself, flipping the paper over and inspecting the back. It had to be a prank, right? So I did what anybody else would have done. I shrugged and tossed it in the back seat where it landed on the floorboard. Then I went to my new job site where I worked as a crane operator. Most of the day, I was up in the cab transporting steel. It's a hard, lonely life, but I was okay with that. It was good money. I didn't even mind the fact that I didn't get toilet breaks. I'd just carry a water bottle. High up in the cab, I saw the other craft workers milling about, doing their jobs. Flagging, sanding, and pipe laying. Since it took me 30 minutes to climb out of the crane, most were already gone home by the time I got down. As for that odd note, I wanted to mention it to my old boss, ask him if he'd ever heard of it, but it seemed like he hadn't come in that day, so I just got on with things, finished for the day, and went home. The following morning, I went out to my car. All of the windows had been busted out. The windshield looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. To say I was pissed is an understatement. What the hell? I said to no one, throwing my arms wide, approaching my vehicle. Once again, placed underneath the wiper, was another envelope. This one read, "Warning, fine is now $200. Pay, or you will be sent home." Of all the things I've been through in my life, this was probably the weirdest thing ever. Especially bizarre was that I hadn't heard the glass shatter last night. Surely I thought I would have heard it, considering I was a light sleeper and my bedroom window was only a few feet from my car. Fueled with anger, I crumpled up the letter. I wanted to blame Trevor for this, but the guy hadn't come back home yet. I was the only one here last night. So if it wasn't him, then who was leaving these fines? Still pissed, I removed what was left of the windshield, got in my car, and drove to the address listed on the sheet. In my opinion, this type of behavior warranted an ass whooping, and I was ready to give it. But when I got to the location, it was not exactly what I'd been expecting. It was the damn graveyard in the center of town. My blood chilled as I slowed the car to a stop. The eeriness of the situation made the hair on my arm stand on end, and a twinge of nausea twist my gut. I didn't know what to do, so I stared through the emptiness of where my windshield should have been for a few minutes, gaze wandering across the grave markers. Eventually, I got myself together. The police station was across the street, so that was where I went. It was convenient, considering I needed to fill out a police report to file my insurance anyway. Inside the station, I found a fit middle-aged police officer standing behind a wooden desk. The officer typed away at his computer. "How can I help you?" I put the envelope down on the desk. "Yeah, well, I got this fine and..." Silence fell across the entire police station. Behind him, every head in the room swiveled in my direction. Concern colored all their faces. Some huffed out worried breaths. Others quickly returned their attention to their papers, scribbling fast, avoiding eye contact with me. One guy looked angry, like he really wanted to kick my ass. The officer swallowed. And, where did you find this exactly? Somebody left it on my car. His eyes widened as some type of realization flashed across his face. His hand bounced, knocking on the door. What is it? I asked, feeling my heart rate elevate. The nausea surged again. He cleared his throat. He patted the envelope on the desk and slid it back to me. What is your name, son? He asked. Sam Chavez. He nodded. Well, Sam, I'm gonna need you to pay this. What? You're gonna have to pay this. I don't understand. The man leaned forward with a hard stare. His hand landed on his gun. Is there a problem here? What the hell? I thought. I swallowed, trying to regain my composure. Well, can I just give you the cash then? No, he said. I was so lost. Well, why the hell not? Because you have to mail it. What? You getting loud with me, boy? I blinked. Huh? Pay the fine. Now get the hell out of here before I put you behind bars. Are we clear? Leaving the police station, I was so confused. I was actually scratching the back of my head. This was so insane that I didn't know what else to do. I needed something, answers or anything, or at least to find out who was doing this. I tried calling my old boss to ask him for some advice. No answer. I even tried calling Trevor. Same. So I drove the 50 miles out of town and stopped at Walmart. There, I picked up an outdoor Nest camera and headed back to my place. After setting up the camera, I installed the app on my phone and paid the subscription service to actively record all movements. Then I fell asleep. That night, around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed, alerting me that there was motion outside. Half awake, I clicked open the app and saw a truck pull to a stop in the driveway. I recognized the man who got out from the pictures I'd seen, so I knew it was Trevor. He slammed his door and made his way into the house. I considered talking to him, introducing myself, but the guy was probably tired. It was 3 a.m. after all. So I closed out the app and went back to sleep. That morning, as I came out of my bedroom, I saw something in the hall that made me freeze. Blood. I was almost sure it was blood. It had that smell. A trail of splatters led to the kitchen. I followed. There, I found Trevor. He was laying on the kitchen counter, chest cracked open like an alien had burst out of it. Ribs spread, viscera scattered all over the tile and sink. His face was twisted in horror, his mouth wide open, his lips stretched in a silent howl of agony. In his hand was an envelope that I was all too familiar with. For some reason, it was the cleanest thing in the kitchen. There wasn't a speck of blood on it. The letter hung down low, angled so that the wording faced me. It read, "This is the cost." Fighting either a panic attack or a nervous breakdown, I staggered back and vomited on the floor. I sucked in a huge breath, trying to force myself to calm down. But I couldn't hold it against the next rush of vomit, and I spewed the rest of my dinner onto the kitchen floor. Coughing and gasping, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and scrambled away from the body. After what little rationality I had left, I fished my phone out of my pocket and dialed those 3 numbers. 911, "What's your emergency?" said the lady on the opposite end of the line. I took a deep breath. The air still smelled of blood and vomit. Hi, my roommate. He's dead." "What is the address?" 212 Silver. 212 Silver Lake Drive? A man is dead?" Her voice sounded terse, maybe even annoyed. "Yes. How did you? This is why you pay the damn fine," she said. Click. So I did. I mailed in a check that night and got the hell out of Dodge. I'm used to living on the move, but I never packed up so quickly. I left the body just lying there as I cleared out. Someone else's problem. I'd had enough of this crap. Screw that creepy-ass town, the job, and that damn graveyard. I drove all night, heading to my parents' house, where I knew they had my old bedroom waiting. I didn't want to wake them, so when I got there, I used the spare key to let myself in. Something was waiting for me on my old bedroom door. My blood froze. Scotch taped on the wood was a note. Same familiar handwriting, same red crayon. And I realized that maybe I'd made a mistake. All along, the notes had been delivered to Trevor's address. Trevor had been the one to die. Perhaps whoever, whatever, had sent those fines, they hadn't meant any of it for me. But now I had their attention. The note read, "Who are you?" Numbly, I pushed the door open. I was just tired. I didn't know what to do, what the hell I'd gotten myself into. I had the idea that I could collapse into bed, figure something out later. Inside the walls, the bed, the desk, all of them were plastered with hundreds of wide-ruled loose-leaf paper. Who are you? The little stone figure Mom kept in her bedside table scared me the first time I saw it. Man-like, but not quite human. It sat holding its knees to its chest and peeked out from behind them, with shy eyes and an evil grin. It seemed to have no neck, until Mom turned it around to show me its backside. Its neck was curled up along its spine, like a twisted slinky with a head at the end. Dad stood in the corner watching us. When I made a scared face, he ran a reassuring hand down my back. "It's okay, son. It won't hurt you. We follow its rules." I hated looking at it, but every night, Mom told me to kneel down and whisper the prayer that has burned itself into my imagination. "All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do." Mom taught me to say these words on my 5th birthday, before I could even read or write. I would sit down on my knees in the dark room, with my hands cupped, and stare at its open eyes, which I thought moved sometimes. I used to think it was just a trick of the light. The worship of Z required little from us. Whereas friends went to church and read the Bible, we kept the statue in a dark room and prayed once a day. We had nothing else to do for it. That year, Mom got pregnant with my little brother, and she expressed her gratitude one night by sobbing uncontrollably while praying. I had no idea back then, but Mom had been what Bibles call barren, and doctors said her pregnancies were miracles. 8 months later, She gave birth to Jay at home, without a nurse, and I said my prayers as usual while she cut some of Jay's hairs and sat it down in front of Z's statue. My eyes searched hers for a reason why she would do that, but her eyes avoided mine. While I prayed, I thought Z's eyes were staring at the tuft of baby hair. Not much changed in our lives except for this addition to our evening prayer. Every night, Mom cut some of Jay's hair and sat it down with Dad and me to pray. Jay got older and the ritual went on. My parents loved Jay. Mom often talked about how every day was a gift and we should be grateful because a tragedy could happen at any time. Unlike me growing up, Jay got everything new from the store. He began to be a little spoiled, but never naughty or uncontrollable. He was always happy, smiling, laughing, and doing crazy boy things, like dancing on his chair at dinner. Mom would laugh with tears in her eyes. Dad, who had been strict with me, smiled, but I saw his eyes were red. They always seemed to be crying when they had every reason to be happy. I assumed this was how parents acted with the second child. The difference between my upbringing and Jay's became apparent in other ways too. When he learned to say his first words, I asked Mom if we would teach him about Z. But to my surprise, she glared at me and said, "You can never tell him about that, even when he turns 5? Even then," she said and went about folding laundry. After reading Jay to sleep, we all prayed in the room where my parents kept Z's statue, behind a locked door. Jay never went inside, no matter how much he asked. We kneeled down. Mom placed a snippet of Jay's hair before Z. Then we prayed. "All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do." As we reached the final line, Mom dissolved into tears. Dad, kneeling at my side, reached around to rub her shoulder. "It's all right," he whispered. She shook her head. "I'm a terrible mother." I glanced at the statue of Z, with my hand still clasped. Its eyes had settled on her, and its grin looked wider than usual. Finally, we finished our prayers. Dad locked the door, and I went to bed. Soon, Jay began speaking like a healthy boy his age, and I discovered how a wrinkly-faced baby can slowly become full of personality. "Why is Mom's hair long?" asked Jay. "Because she's a girl," I said. I had never seen a girl with short hair before. "How did it get long?" "It just grows out and she cuts it every once in a while." "Why doesn't my hair grow out?" "Because when you go to sleep, Mom cuts it for you." "Because it hurts when it gets cut?" "No, because..." I paused. "Because it's easier." "Does she cut your hair when you sleep too?" "Yes." "Does she cut Dad's hair?" "Yes, she cuts all of our hair. Now stop asking questions." Our parents started planning a huge party for Jay's 5th birthday. All of his parties had been extravagant to the point of excess. This was supposed to be even more elaborate, but Mom seemed less and less happy as the birthday got closer. She lived on the verge of tears and had to force herself to smile. Dad had red, moist eyes whenever Jay hugged or kissed him. They would spend an hour reading to him every night. I didn't share a bedroom with Jay, but our bedroom was connected. If I left the doors open, I could listen to their voices. One night, Mom told him an unusual story. "Don't you need a book?" "No, this one's all in my head," said Mom. I listened from my desk while I sat drawing. Once upon a time, there was a train driver. He had a very difficult job. He had to drive the train and keep all the passengers safe. He drove the train for many years and never had any problems. But one day, something terrible happened. I heard Jay ask, "Is this a scary story?" "Yes, it's a little scary, but I think you should hear it." "Okay," Mom went on. "The terrible thing that happened was that someone was tied on the tracks, like in those old Western films. Do you know what I'm talking about?" Silence, while Jay probably nodded. "Well, an innocent townsperson was tied up on the tracks. The train driver would have to pull a lever to change course, and he had enough time to do it. But when he found out, there was another problem. The other track had 3 people tied up on it. Couldn't he stop the train? No, the train can't be stopped in time. It takes too long. He just had enough time to decide if he'll pull the lever or not. And if he pulls it, 3 people die?" "Right. Only one person dies if he doesn't pull it." "I don't like this story." "I don't like it either. Let's do a different one. I know it's scary, Jay, but it's important. I want to know what you would do." "I don't like thinking about it. I feel the same way. Can we read The Rabbits Make Soup instead?" His voice had a slight whine to it. "I'll read it after you give me your answer. I promise." In my mind, the right thing to do seemed obvious. Don't pull the trigger and save the 3 people. But it didn't have the normal feeling of the right thing. It should be right no matter what. But this wasn't. I had never heard a story like that. "I think I know what to do," whispered Jay. "But it still feels wrong." "Yeah, I know what you mean. I think most people would agree with you. I agree with you. It feels sad for the boy who needs to die for the other 3. Yes, it's still sad for him. 3 people live if he dies, though." "What about his parents?" "They'll be devastated, but they'll feel proud to know that their little boy saved the lives of 3 other people." There was a long silence until Mom said, "Sometimes, the right thing to do isn't the right thing for everybody. You just have to pick the rightest one." Jay had trouble sleeping that night, as one might expect. My parents stayed with him past midnight. When at last, he fell asleep, Dad fetched me for the prayers. I had needed to stay awake for them. "Sorry to keep you up so late," he said, "but you know it's important." Dad unlocked the room, and we kneeled down in the light of the candle, saying the words that we always said to the thing with the moving eyes. Mom put Jay's hair down in front of it. That night, she looked resigned as she whispered, "All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do." Jay's 5th birthday approached. I began hearing noises downstairs around that time. They came from the locked room and started after Mom and Dad fell asleep. Something paced back and forth inside. I heard it from the top of the staircase, where I stood listening and wondering if I should wake up my parents. Eventually, the noises would stop and I would go to bed. Lying awake, I began to imagine the statue of Z with its clasped knees, searching eyes, and thieving smile. I imagined its long ribbed neck, like a 3rd arm with a head on top, slowly unraveling itself and probing forward like a snake. I wonder if Mom heard Z, or whatever it was, moving in the locked room too, because she cried harder than usual during our prayers. "Mom, we can stop doing this if you don't like it," I whispered. Dad locked the door as Mom and I stood waiting in the dark. Red numbers from a digital clock on the stove colored the downstairs crimson. "Do you know why we do what we do?" she asked. I shook my head. "It's all for you," she whispered. "All of this is for you, and you only." "But what about Jay?" I asked. I felt something hard and painful in my throat. "We love Jay, but we don't do this for him," she said. I looked at Dad, confused. "Promise us whatever happens, you won't tell anybody." "Why?" He took a deep breath. "Because, son, we would make it mad." I glanced over my shoulder at the locked room, and I felt the hairs all over my body rising. "We made a promise long ago, and we need to keep that promise," whispered Dad. "What promise?" a fourth voice asked. It had come from the staircase. Jay stood near the top, crouching down to see us. "What promise?" he asked again. "Can I know?" "Go to bed, honey," said Mom in a smiling voice. "We're just promising that we'll all go to sleep earlier from now on." "Really?" asked Jay. "Isn't that right, son?" Dad asked. I nodded. "Let's go back to bed," said Mom, shepherding Jay to his bedroom. The next morning during breakfast, Jay asked again why we had been standing together in the darkness last night. "Did you have a dream about that?" asked Mom, not looking up from the eggs in the frying pan. "No," said Jay. "I saw you." "I think you might have had a strange dream." Mom served us the eggs, still not looking at either of us. I just stared into my plate. Mom said again, starting to wash the pan. "The last night I ever saw my brother, that thing making noises in the locked room came out. It happened on Jay's 5th birthday. I think we threw the biggest party any boy his age had ever had. It shocked me to see the lengths to which my parents had gone, all while trying not to cry. Mom burst into tears in front of all the guests several times. She just handed Jay a gift when the tears started pouring down her face. Jay stared in confusion, not sure if he should open the gift or not. My aunt asked if my mom needed anything. "They just grow up so fast, you know?" Mom said, wiping her face. Jay went to sleep that night in an ecstasy of gift-getting. He was probably the happiest kid alive. I think my parents intended that to be the case from the beginning. It was supposed to make them feel better about what happened next. Mom cried hysterically through our prayers after Jay fell asleep, and went on crying in bed until late. Sometime around 3 o'clock, I heard the thing moving around downstairs in the locked room. I crept out of bed to peek from the top stair and saw the handle of the room jiggling. It popped open, and in the red glow of the clock, I thought I saw a floating black snake, moving slowly through the air and into the kitchen. Except, the snake had something like a human's head on the end. I leaped away from the staircase, ran to my room, and jumped into bed. But for a long time, I heard nothing. All I could hear was my own breathing, and I struggled to keep quiet. The staircase began to groan. It seemed to take hours to reach the 2nd floor. Mom was crying across the hall in her bedroom. Dad yelled out to me, "Stay in your room, son. Do not come out." The thing reached my door and paused. I heard the handle turning, but I kept my head under the blankets, shaking and dripping sweat. With my eyes closed, I heard it lurching toward the front of my bed. I felt a gentle pressure on the blankets covering my feet. Something began slithering up the bed, searching in the blanket folds. It sniffed like a wild animal chasing a scent. Something wet and warm brushed against my thigh, but the entity just kept searching and sniffing. All the way to the back of my head beside my ear, and this time, I heard and felt sniffing. Hot breath filled my left ear. Its cheek rubbed against the side of my face. Its nose took a deep whiff of my hair. It seemed to be waiting, unsure of something. Then it slowly pulled away, and I thought about Z's head being dragged backward across my bed by its coiling neck. Finally, I heard it walking out. I stayed under the covers. Gone or not, I refused to check either way, but I kept listening. Footsteps in the hallway advanced towards Jay's door and stopped again. He must have been awake because he screamed. Jay slept with his door open and would have seen Z standing in the doorway. First would have come Z's head, peeking around the corner. It would have hovered into the room, supported by its rope of neck. The body would have come next, hunched forward, hands reaching out and grasping. Jay cried for Mom first. I could hear him through the connecting bathroom. It went on and on. Nobody came. He tried calling Dad. Dad didn't come. So he tried calling me. Finally, Dad's voice broke through. If we don't give it what it wants, it'll kill us instead. Do you understand? It will kill us. Instead of running to help, I shut the bathroom door, connecting our rooms. The screams grew muffled, and I got back into bed, pulled the blankets over me, and shut my eyes. Not long after that, the screams stopped. At some point, I think I heard the thing moving back down the hallway and downstairs, closing the door behind it. I stayed awake until morning, clenching my fist, sweating in the hot air below the blanket. I only stuck out my head when I heard birds singing and took a deep breath of air, sunshine on my face. Mom didn't leave her room that day. Dad cooked for me, and we ate in silence. I never checked my brother's room. I didn't want to know what happened. After sunset, Mom came downstairs. We needed to pray. We kneeled down in front of the statue, with my brother's hair still in front of it, and said what we always said. All our blood and bones belong to you. Lucky we who know that you are true. We do the things that others would not do. Coming out of the room, Dad locked the door, and Mom put her hands on my shoulders, looking me straight in my eyes. Do you understand now? This was all for you. I said nothing. You can never stop praying, said Dad. Understand? And neither will we. And I never have.